contemporary art is global art. It's so everything we do here is global, but it's right here in Columbus. So thank you all for your support in that. Michael Eastman's work is a perfect example of that. He's a Midwesterner. His work really discovers and shows the beauty and decay that you see in Havana, that we experience in Havana. And in many ways, he is, like Ron said, the center of our exhibition. We installed his photographs in the hallways and in the galleries so that to give the feel of what it feels like to be in the city. And so that you experience them pretty close up so that you could feel that you're entering into the room or you see the building from a distance along down the hallway. He has been traveling to Havana over 5 times, I've read, over the past 20 years. So his work really explores the changes and the diversity in such a beautiful city. He'll speak more to the photographs and how they really are a true and honest depiction, almost in a historical preservation sense. There are no people. There are people they show up occasionally, but they're more absent than not. But the human scale and the human presence is certainly felt. I know he'll address how he takes pictures, what kind of camera he uses, but you can tell there's a real traditional, honest directness that I think appeals to a real great group. Everything I've read is he's incredibly educated, but he's a self-taught photographer. So his inspirations comes from the great photographers from Weston, Ansel Adams, Walker Evans. So there's a real strong, traditional, straightforward integrity in the works that makes them so wonderful to respond to. His works you may have seen in the pages of magazines from Time and Life and in the New York Times to art publications, Art News, Art in America. He's been exhibiting in galleries and has recently just signed up with the Edward Hook Gallery in New York, although I'm probably not pronouncing that right. And his work is in major museum collections across the country, from the Metropolitan Museum of Art. He's had recent exhibitions at the Tampa Museum of Art, and the Oklahoma City organized an exhibition of his work. And there are 3 books: the Havana book, which we have downstairs in the bookstore, and he's offered to sign some later. He has another book from 2008, Vanishing America, The End of Main Street Diners, Drive-ins, Donut Shops, and Other Everyday Monuments, and one that particularly interests me as a horse fan, A Book of Horses from 2003. So I will be ordering that on Amazon tonight. So without further ado, I'll bring Michael up to talk about some earlier works. Thank you.
People can use these chairs. We could let people use these chairs. Hello. It's great to be in the Midwest, where I'm from and where I live now. There's a chair here if somebody wants it. I feel really kind of conflicted. I feel really great there's so many people. I feel a little guilty to be sitting in too. And how's the sound? Is that all right? Good. All right. So I'm going to talk about Cuba. I'm open to all kinds of questions. In fact, I'll probably at some point beg you for some. But I'm going to start by talking about where I sort of came from. I taught myself. I reinvented the wheel. Sometimes the cart didn't drive straight, which was okay because you keep learning, and that's what this is all about for me, learning and challenging myself. So when I first began, most of us, when we pick up a camera, it's sort of like a gun sight. we look through the viewfinder as if there was a target there and pay very little attention to the rectangle around it. So when we take a picture of something without looking at the relationship of what is in that rectangle. And so when I first began, one of the first things I did, not that I was so interested in architecture, but I was more interested in the way lines broke up a rectangular space. So these first pieces were done in 1972. They were studies, formalistic studies. Composition was what I was really interested in. There was some narrative in it, although I didn't intend to be. But this picture was one of the first ones I sold. A friend of mine who was a lawyer bought it, put it behind his desk, and said, "When you come to me, I'm the only one that can bend the bars." And so that was my first sale, and probably my only sale for the first 10 years. But it was, I never thought about that. To me, it was a set of verticals with one difference. And I thought that bit of tension was pretty interesting. So that's sort of why I made the photograph. So this isn't a photograph of a floodgate, but it's a photograph of diagonals. And I always find myself, I think it was Ansel Adams that talked about the notion that if you move an inch to the left and to the right and up and down, that you change the landscape. You move mountains 100 miles by just a simple movement. So I worked very deliberately. I worked on a tripod so that I could move a few inches and return to it and see what the relationships were. And so these things were very considered. Again, these are stairs and bricks, but they're, to me, diagonal lines. Sort of a formalistic, again, not really about a window, but about composition, not about a mural in downtown St. Louis. This is about 83, 84. But about a composition, about formalism. That's what I was really interested in. And the interesting thing is as I worked on this talk, and I looked at what I was doing now and what I did 10 years ago and 20 years ago, it was so related to this, that underneath every single photograph, including all the Cuba work, is this structure, is the relationship, it's the proportions. At some point, I started getting involved in, like a juggler who's working with one ball. That's how you start, that's how you learn. And then you bring 2 and 3 and 4. So too, I felt like I was so close to things and so sort of abstract that I wanted to work, and I worked with a wider angle lens, got in more elements, had more kind of challenge to make these compositions work. And I went to a wide angle lens, which changed everything. And so this is like in, I don't know, 80, 81, 80, something like that. And it's a photograph of I-beams. It's a simple photograph of a stack of I-beams. But the wide angle pushed it in a different direction altogether, almost like some kind of blossom, some kind of explosion. And the other problem with the wide angle was that you couldn't really control the verticals. You know, when you take a picture of a building and point it up, it's got these converging lines. I lost control, which, you know, I didn't really want to do. I wanted to be able to control everything I did in that frame. And mail shoot in St. Louis, but, you know, if it was square, it would be different, and I would have control. I could do it either way. I could do it wide angle distortion, or I could do it squared up. So at this point, I bought a 4x5 camera. This is about 1982. And with a 4x5 camera, it's a cloth over the head, old school, or as people call me, ancient times now, I guess. But what I could do is I can control the vertical just as you did when you photographed a building. But you could also, and this was a big also for me, you could also photograph black and white or color. In other words, before I had a fixed camera and I was shooting black and white and I was seeing in black and white and I was developing everything and printing everything. So I didn't ever try color because I'd have to pull all the film out of the holder and shoot a whole roll of color, and I couldn't afford it. So basically I stuck with black and white. 4x5, I had a case with holders, some of which are black and white, some of which were color. And in '82, this was one of the first times I went out and photographed, made it in black and white, made it in color. And when I saw the color, it was like eureka. It was like the difference was between grays and blacks was now ivories and whites and cyans and dark royal blues. And it was a different picture. It was sort of like everything came to life. And everything, from then on, anytime I saw a black and white picture, it was like, well, I wonder what color it is. And before that, it was like, well, who cares? But suddenly, that's all I cared about. And so going from being sort of a minimalist, very much about how things were composed, to a colorist, same family, but another element sort of to include in my work. Because what you're trying to do as an artist, I think, is get better. And you're trying to make images that have more and more layers and layers of ideas. You know, the notion that it's not just about this, it's about that, and it's about this, and then, oh, it's about that. That's what you want. I mean, that's what's so great about this museum. When we looked at it the other day, there were so many examples that the more you looked, the more you saw. And there was more mystery and more questions and answers at the end. And that's what I want. That's what I want with my work then, now, and tomorrow. So I started photographing in color, but the way I did it was not so much looking at color, but sort of looking at monochromatic color. So this is a white column at dusk against a white wall, but it's yellow and it's ivory and it's white and it's gray and it's, you know, in black and white, this thing is completely cold, not as alive. Grid of blue. There's 6 or 7 different blues in there. So in black and white, it's an interesting photograph. Now to me, it's alive and there's more. More emotion. So black and white and gray and a touch of yellow. When I talked a little bit ago about how you place the camera and you move an inch here and an inch there and it moves a mountain miles, with this, it's something I always seem to do, was get rid of the cues of that this is a three-dimensional space. So it reads as a really flat thing because you don't see any perspective lines going back, any diagonals. And it's flat, so I'm taking a three-dimensional space and making it two-dimensional. And in part, I think this is my early explorations into painting with using a camera. That this is as much about painting as it is about photography. And when it's successful, it's about both. So I did a group in 83, 84, 85 called Horizontal Cityscapes, in which I was using the camera to make really big prints. Again, the idea of painting, the difference between photography and painting was, painting a lot of times was really, really big prints, big paintings. Photographic prints were 8 by 10, 11 by 14. So in the early 80s, I wanted to do big prints. These were 6 feet, 6 feet across. And they were about, to me, again, more and more about painting. The texture of these things looked like they had been painted on. But it was about proportion too. So it had the emotionality of this added color, and it had the proportions along a horizontal of verticals. And each shape that was created by these long horizontals created a composition that both had tension and balance. It was resolved. This one actually had painting on it, you know. But again, big prints, the viewer and myself approached it differently. Maybe because of the scale. Still doing minimal color. Again, this one, I spent, I don't know how long, maybe a half hour moving a half an inch left, half inch right, because every time I moved, the parking meters would overlap. So it was literally a half an hour exploration in the space of 8 inches. Well, if I move a quarter inch here, what happens? And you look at them all, and if I move a quarter inch there, fortunately the light held.